safety. And on Fox News Sunday, Texas Governor Greg Abbott praised the administration's response and said so far his state has gotten everything it's asked for from the federal government.
I give FEMA a grade of A+, all the way from the president down. I've spoken to the president several times, to his cabinet members, such as Secretary of Homeland Security, such as the administrator of FEMA, such as Tom Price, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and so all across the board, from the White House to the federal administration to FEMA, they've been very helpful.
And in its latest update, FEMA said that it has search and rescue teams there in Texas working with local officials. And it also said that it has relief supplies ready to go to the area and staging areas in both Texas and Louisiana. Supplies including water, meals, tarps, and generators. Leland?
And we're hearing hard to get some of those resources in with the weather the way it is there in Houston especially. All right, Garrett Tenney at the White House with the president coming back later today. Garrett, thank you. Be sure to stay tuned for Fox News Sunday immediately after this program. Chris Wallace talking with Texas Governor Greg Abbott on the response to Hurricane Harvey and what they need from the federal government. That starts 2 p.m. Eastern right after this show.
And coming up, citizen journalists, hundreds if not more, have uploaded videos and pictures of Harvey devastation, from acts of courage to red flags or danger zones. We've got the best coming up. Plus, remembering one of America's bravest who served his country in Afghanistan and Iraq. We'll remember Sergeant Alan Stigler Jr. coming up. And fallout from President Trump's pardoning of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Critics say it undermines the judicial.
Excessive scans, that it's not as well defined. Nonetheless, there may in fact still be a circulation there. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more, see if we can get a better look at that. Right in there near Santa Fe, some potential for a tornado as that's getting towards the radar. So let's take that forward and see where that's going to be headed in the next few minutes. It's moving off towards the northwest here, west of the Gulf Freeway. I'm going to back out just a little bit and we'll get a better sense of where that is. Excuse me, coming up through Galveston County, the west side of Galveston County. So just to the west of League City, maybe coming towards Friendswood ultimately, as well as the Country Meadows Montessori School. And what's happening more broadly right now is that we've got this low-level wind shear. You've got winds that are coming out of the southeast and east at the surface, and then winds coming across that at about a mile up, and that's why you've got this tornado threat that continues for a lot of the Gulf Coast and southwestern Louisiana. Steph, let's get back out to you.
Okay, so we want to talk about, you mentioned Louisiana. The windshield, or I should say the cloud shield of Harvey stretches 700 miles. So this is not just a Houston thing. This is not just a suburb of Houston thing. This is a wide-reaching, listen, 8.7 million are under flash flood warnings in Texas. 12.2 million are under flash flood watch. What's the difference? A warning means it's imminent or it's occurring. Watch means conditions are favorable for flash flooding. There's 6 million under. Started, I believe, in San Antonio, now making your way to Smithville. What's it been like for you?
Hey, Stephanie, you know, the flooding here has been really one that town hasn't seen very often. In fact, some parts of the city have never seen water. This area where we're at has flooded a few times in the past, but they've never seen it this high. And a lot of residents are really coming together. You know, the big thing was all this rain really fell overnight, and it really came up to people's homes. And people had to get out. In fact, I talked to one of the residents here in Smithville who lives just down the streets here in one of these houses. And she said it was about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and the water just came up. Of course, Smithville picking up about 16 inches in the past 24 hours. And what happened was the water came up and she was trying to grab all her belongings. She just couldn't keep up with it. So get this, the town of about 3,800 people came together, and the mayor and his wife came over to help and get her to safer ground, get all her animals collected and back up to higher ground. And her neighbor is letting her stay with her where his house is not flooded. But she said water was coming in the house. And again, that's not the only story here. There are several homes throughout town, especially on this street, but also north of the city, that have been flooded as well. And again, we're on the banks of the Colorado River, not the same Colorado River that's back out west, but it goes through Texas. And it goes through downtown Austin and here about 50 miles east where we are in Smithville. Now, I checked the latest reports, and currently it's at about 25 feet, which is in moderate flood stage, but it's expected to crest at 32 feet, which is major flood stage, and that begins at 28 feet. So the Colorado River is about a mile or so up to our north. And again, we're keeping a close eye on that as it's expected to be major flood stage. Now, one good news, the city has come out and is pumping the water. Of course, earlier, this whole street was covered with water. But if we come over here, you can see this pump. It's starting to help bring the water down just a little bit. So hopefully, we'll be able to continue to get all the water on this side of the street and get it out of people's homes. But again, the rain keeps coming down. And will it ever stop? Again, we really don't know. As far as the rain here in Smithfield goes, it really is a tragic story. It's really what we've been fearing. And again, it's still playing out before our eyes. 16 inches and counting here in Smithville. And we'll have much more from here when we return. But we're going to send things back over to Steph.
Okay, Chris, we appreciate that. And I have something that I need to get out. It's very urgent from officials in Houston. They are asking if you have a high water vehicle or a boat and helping rescue in your community, call us to coordinate. And the number, I've put it on my Twitter, but here it is, 713-881-3100. Ask for the fire marshal. Again, if you have a high water vehicle or a boat, they want you to help coordinate with them. 713-881-3100. Ask for the fire marshal. Excuse me. Behind me, the Buffalo Bayou. It's continuing to rise. There were signs out there that we saw earlier that you cannot see any longer. It's 53 miles long. It was formed 1,800 years ago. It dumps into Galveston Bay in the Gulf of Mexico. The watershed approximately 500 square miles. So all along this bayou, you're going to hear about different records. Already we've had 9 records set on different bayous here in the Houston area. Let's go to another area. Ron Blum has been following this story as well. Ron, exactly where you are and how has the day progressed? Because for us, right where I'm standing, about an hour and 5 minutes ago, it was dry, and now it is up to almost the middle of my calf.
Steph, we have seen it come up and down today. Overnight, it was just pounding this west side, southwest side of Houston. In fact, at this convenience store, they said the water was close to 10, 12 inches deep inside. Right now, it's maybe 3 inches deep. When we got here 2 hours ago, there was no water inside, so it's fluctuated. We had those very heavy bands moving through here around 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock local time. For the last hour, it has pretty much let up, which has been a relief because we saw the rise of water ease up. That's Bray Bayou behind me. Just down from here, downstream, is Clear Creek. It is flooding. The water is backing up into there. There's a lot of apartment complexes in this part of Houston, in the Bel Air area. One family that just walked through, they were trying to find some food for the young children at home, and the woman told me that the water was getting into the ground level apartments and that hundreds of people were going to be inundated just along Clear Creek. That is just to the south here of Beechnut. Beechnut being the major east-west, Bel Air about a mile to our north, another major east-west. All of that area between these two roads is flooded, and as you move in towards downtown, you get into even more flooding. The Sam Houston Toll Road, which is just maybe a half mile or so behind me, all the low spots are flooded. They've been flooded since overnight. Some areas have 9 feet of water in them. It was interesting to hear you report asking people to coordinate the rescue because, you know, we learned in Katrina so many of the rescues were done by volunteers who came on board, and in some areas they were turned away, in other areas they were welcomed with open arms. I think they need to welcome them here. This flooding is so extensive and so much is going on. So situation here, that bayou there, 2-3 inches from earlier. We still have an escape route out of here, but we're watching this and we're hoping that this lull kind of stays in place. Are we going back to Steph?
Yes, Ron, I'll take it from here. I'll take it from here, Ron. And I just want people to understand. You can see the rain. It's a little bit light right now, but we'll get heavier downpours that blast on through. So it's not over. It's not going to be over for days. Even if we just continue to get light rain like this, it's going to be consistent. With that said, you might have to evacuate vertically, mean going up. You're going to have to take an axe. You need to go to the top of your roof. We've had over 2,000 rescues here. The airport is closed, not expected to open until Wednesday. Record flooding at 9 locations and 9 bayous around the Houston metro area. The National Weather Service calling this epic, catastrophic flooding. 3 people already have died from this. If you need to call 911, don't hang up, stay on hold. And I know that 911 is starting to call people back. If they missed calls earlier, they're doing the best that they can. The mayor pro tem of South Houston rescued families from 10 attics. So this is being watched by everyone, and everyone is doing the best they can. Power outages, almost 300,000. We're going to be back after a quick break for your local on the 8th. Continue to follow us on social media as well.
Are moving from Austin and otherwise moving back to the Gulf of Mexico have to respond so quickly. So I think they're taking a breath. There's some slow rain right now. It's kind of stopped. There's a little bit of sunshine. But people didn't expect flooding to this degree.
So, Leslie, I know you said it's neighbor helping neighbor, essentially. Tell me what you and others around you are doing to ride out this storm.
Sure. I think the first thing we've done is when these tornadoes hit in Sienna Plantation, a lot of people came out with hand saws, came out with water, big trucks, gloves, the local high school. There was a group of high school students who came out and they organized very quickly just to get debris. Just to describe this massive rain and debris and insulation. It was in the trees. It's fiberglass. It's all over the yards. And in some cases, you had either wood from other new home construction just barreling through brick and basically exploding through back bedrooms. How people escaped, it's just shocking that there were no real injuries. But everyone's just trying to pull debris out and cover these rooftops. These roofing crews have been moving in really quickly, and I know they're moving around the city. And that's where I am. I think, that, Elaine, the story we saw this morning that is so heartbreaking is out on East from 3 a.m., the time that the tornado warnings went off on my phone, have been watching, and people have been waiting 5 and 6 hours to be rescued. These are low-income, in many cases, minority communities They're on air mattresses. People have been going with jet skis and any type of flotation device to pull hundreds of people out of some of these neighborhoods. And these are people that do not have flood insurance. They do not have renter's insurance. They are losing everything. And so we cannot begin to think about the impact it's having across the full spectrum of Houston.
Absolutely devastating. Leslie, if you'll stay with us for a moment, we want to go to our DeMarco Morgan, who is in Dickinson, Texas. We have been talking to DeMarco all throughout the course of the day, and he has been showing us some pretty dramatic images of rescues taking place one after another. DeMarco, tell us what it's like where you are right now in Dickinson.
Well, Elaine, it just started pouring down again. It's pretty heavy now, and most of the people are being evacuated from the bridge. Our crew is about to leave because I think I said it earlier that both sides are becoming, one side is most certainly impassable. The other side, we can get out, but if we need to get out and if we want to get out, the best way to do it and the best time to do it is now. So we're going to try to get to higher ground and get to safety if we can in this area. But sorry about that. That's the phone that's ringing. My apologies.
That's right.
But a lot of people here are they're on the bridge trying to get off, and the crazy thing about it, they've been using buses and heavy equipment to sort of get people off of here, and we're surrounded with nothing but water. And those businesses that you saw, they're completely covered in water. The only pretty much legit way to get around is by boat. Our crew doesn't have a boat, so we have big trucks, and we're going to try to make it through. We're going to do our best to try and make it through this little area that we do see cars passing by, and there's some cops and a lot of officers down here, so I believe we can do it on one side of the highway. And if we can make it through there, we can head back to Galveston, but if we don't...
DeMarco, are you there? All right, DeMarco Morgan. We've been listening in there. DeMarco Morgan reporting. Yes. Is everything all right, DeMarco?
Yes. We're taking hits with the signal. Sorry about that. But,
that's right.
I don't know where I left off, but I did tell you that we're trying to get to Galveston now, which is the closest town. So we're going to do our best to try and make it through. Right now we're on 45, and everybody's driving in the wrong direction, the opposite direction, because this is the only way that we can get out. So we're going to try to move to a safer area right now, just so we won't be stuck as well on this bridge. They're already evacuating people and bringing in big buses just to take them through one of the streets that's passable. One side is impassable, but I think we can make it through this other side. But Elaine, this is something that's serious. I've never seen anything like this in my years of reporting. And when you think about Hurricane Katrina, those pictures are all too reminiscent of what we saw then. And then we're coming up on that anniversary as well.
Absolutely. DeMarco, for those viewers who might just be joining us, DeMarco had been reporting from that very vantage point that we're looking at right now. That was a bridge where he had been observing many rescues happening. You see that the current was moving so quickly there, and DeMarco was doing an extraordinary job there talking to some of the folks as they were literally brought to safety right before his eyes. But you get a sense there of just how quickly this water was rising, so much so that now people are being moved off that point where DeMarco had been positioned with his live camera, and now, as DeMarco was just explaining, they are moving to higher ground because the water continues to rise. DeMarco, are rescuers that you've been able to speak with, have you had an opportunity to talk to any of them? What are conditions like for them? Are they able to get to where they need to go?
I'll tell you this, most of the rescuers that we've spoken with have been complete strangers. These are people who have little small boats, or folks who have just been, sort of jumping in the water and trying to get to these families, especially with small children and pets here. So many of the rescuers that we've spoken with have all been folks who are not official or with the city or with emergency management. And they have talked about, how some of the areas are very hard to get to because the current is very strong. We saw a guy in a pickup truck trying to drive through what we all knew was impossible to get through, trying to drive through the water, and the current was so strong it sort of spun his truck around, and he hit two poles, but he was able to back up and head back in the other direction. But they're talking about how it's also emotional because you have elderly people who are being transported and rescued by sanitation trucks. because the equipment is much bigger. It's more heavier, of course, and durable in situations like this. But we've seen elderly people who can barely stand, elderly people on oxygen tanks who've had to be rescued. I was speaking with one young man. He has a family, his mother and father. I'm not sure if he was able to get back in contact with him because I lost him, but his parents were in their 80s. They're in their 80s, and they were stuck at last check in their attic because their home was completely filled with water.
DeMarco, I wonder, the folks that you spoke with who were lucky enough to get rescued and were able to carry with them whatever possessions they were able to gather, what is it that they told you about how this water surprised them? What were they told leading up to this?
I spoke to one woman, and she said around 10 o'clock it was completely dry outside. Then about an hour or two, it started to look a little crazy, but they still thought it was manageable. A couple hours later, it looked like a river outside of their home. One of the women that I spoke with, women that I spoke with, she said that she had reached out to the Dickinson Police Department, and we don't know their side of the story, but she said she had constantly been calling police, and they were telling her that they were overwhelmed with rescues and stuff, and so she had to literally wait on one of her neighbors to come by in a boat, and they took turns sort of trying to go rescue other people as well. So they didn't take heed to many of the warnings, but this area also did not have a mandatory evacuation put in place at the time because people knew that there was the second wave of it coming, but I think a lot of people were under the sort of perception that if we survive the first round, okay, nothing may happen to us because it did hit this area pretty hard, and it is nothing but a surprise to many people who live here. The last time they said this area even saw a flood was back in 1979, and you can't even compare it to what's happening right now.
All right, DeMarco Morgan reporting from Dickinson, Texas. DeMarco, please get to safety, and we'll check back with you throughout the day. Let's turn back now to Leslie Sanchez, who's on the phone. Of course, Leslie is a CBSN political contributor, but she is also a native Houstonian. And Leslie, listening to DeMarco there, I can't help but think about what you said a moment ago about how many officials in and around the Houston area appear to have been caught flat-footed by the intensity of this storm.
Absolutely. It's hard not to come to that conclusion when you watch for so many hours the desperation of people trying to move away from high rising water and taking every type of opportunity they can. You saw many cases, Elaine, where, one or two members of the family would venture out and try to see if they could flag down a truck or someone, and by the time they get to a major thoroughfare, they're waist deep in water, and they don't know how to go back and get their mom, get their babies. It was heart-wrenching, and that's why it has come to this point where there is a public call for help, for boats, for any flotation efforts. And I can tell you, all morning we're seeing people, if they have fuel, they were taking fuel. People didn't think of that. People didn't think of water. They were breaking open the doors of a school to have a shelter. And right now, as we're talking, there's 2 tornado warnings nearby and a mandatory evacuation for Rosenberg, which is also, I'm in Fort Bend County. But where do they go?
Right.
So part of the criticism, the mayor, who I do believe the mayor's doing a great job in keeping people informed, and they've thought through this, but there's only so much you can do with limited resources. And I did see one public official say that we have no shame. Well, let's reach out to FBI, anybody that can come forward and provide assistance, because it is at capacity. So there's a limitation. We understand that, but this is the right state for that, Elaine. Texans will, you call them, they will go in and try to help it. And DeMarco mentioned it. He's seeing these. One thing about when you see these cars moving into water, in many cases, it's not to escape, it's to help. And these big trucks, and someone will try to stop them, and then you'll hopefully, in most cases, they back up. But as many times as you tell people not to go through high water, if they think someone is in jeopardy or in dire situation, they're going to find a way to do something.
So, Leslie, you'd mentioned the mayor. So the mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner, spoke a few hours ago, and I was listening to that news conference in which he was asked, why was there no mandatory evacuation order for the city of Houston itself? And what the mayor said was that essentially you had every neighborhood, every bayou that went over its banks. And he talked about how getting 2.3 million people on the road, the approximate population of the city of Houston, to get folks out on the road basically would not have been possible or wise at that point. And he talked about this being an unprecedented amount of water. You are someone who is well acquainted with the city of Houston. Describe for me what some of the messages were from both the local level with the city of Houston, from the state level, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. What is it that people had been saying at the state and local level ahead of this storm?
Ahead of the storm, I think local officials were working hard to really impress upon people how devastating this could be. They used terms like life-threatening, life-endangering, to take this storm seriously, because there's a long history, and it's been reported of hurricanes, tropical storms that have hit Texas, for 100 years. So the difference is there's a lot of construction on floodplains. There's much larger populations that live here now, and you have a really considerably large population in Houston, for example, that had never been through any type of tropical depression or hurricane. They're new to Houston. They don't know what areas tend to flood, and Houston floods. I mean, just a couple inches of rain, and the traditional areas near the freeway flood. But this is just, it's over. You can see it everywhere, Elaine. It's over capacity. So the issue about evacuation, there were calls for evacuation at 1 and 2 in the morning. And I could tell you, as being someone who's seeing them, where do you go? Mm-hmm. There just wasn't enough information. And there also wasn't enough information on these tornado warnings, because the capacity, like I said, in other states, if you've lived through them, you kind of know exactly, you can track it, where it's going. Here you're watching, and it's just this nebulous kind of area, mm-hmm. and I heard the freight train whistling sound, and it is frightening, and you're just not really quite sure. They're talking about a 16-mile area, a 5-mile area. There needs to be more pinpointing so people could react probably in a swifter, smarter manner.
All right, if you're just joining us, on the phone with us is Leslie Sanchez. You know her, of course, as CBSN political contributor. She is, of course, a Houstonian, a native Houstonian who has a very much personal experience when it comes to severe weather in Houston, and was describing for us what the conditions are like in the aftermath and the continuing situation now with what was hurricane and is now tropical storm Harvey. We are also waiting on the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to give an update on the situation there. What we've been looking at all day long are images of sheer devastation at the tremendous amount of water that has been dumped on the Houston area. We've seen a number of rescues take place, not necessarily from officials, but from residents and neighbors helping neighbors, and people trying to do whatever they can to help those in need. You see there one of those situations gone awry as we watch this image out of Houston. An attempt was made at a rescue there, and the water just too fast. But these are the scenes that we have seen play out not just in Houston, but in surrounding communities as well. Our DeMarco Morgan was reporting from a bridge in Dickinson, Texas, not too far from Houston. And all day, this has been the situation. This here, another example, a pickup truck that attempted to make its way through a flooded area there under an overpass, in which the driver thought he could make it through those waters, but obviously very quickly realized that was going to be fruitless. And so that driver, if this is the same driver as the one Mark Strassman, our correspondent there in Houston, from his position, Mark had an opportunity to talk to the driver, who did ultimately make it out safely, but that driver acknowledged how unwise that decision was in hindsight, but he really did believe he thought he could get his pickup truck through. So officials have been cautioning people not to venture out, if at all possible, to remain in their homes and to wait for help. Something astonishing, Leslie, that we have heard as well is the mayor of Houston was advising people to get up to their roofs if possible and not to wait things out in the attic because of the rising water levels and the concern that they could be overcome inside their attics. So a very sobering message from city officials in Houston as we continue to watch these images come in from all parts of the greater Houston area. Leslie, if you can just recap for our viewers who might just be joining us, where are you right now and what are the conditions? What did the early morning hours bring to the area where you are?
Sure, Elaine, I'm in Fort Bend County and near Sugar Land. I'm actually in Sienna Plantation, which is closer to Missouri City. It was one of the first areas to have a touchdown of a tornado right immediately after the hurricane had passed and come to land, or the eye had come to land. And it was one of those situations where people just got the alerts on the phone, and I can assure you for 24 hours, it's heart-wrenching. The alarms ring every 30 minutes from a flash flood, but really the one you're watching for is the tornado warning. It's not the alert. It comes out of nowhere. And after the experience, there were damaged over 50 homes and just really kind of went right down the middle of Sienna Plantation. People are much more aware of it, but the alert or the concern is that people were so focused on the hurricane and these winds that these tornado warnings, they hadn't taken that as seriously or into consideration, weren't quite prepared to react as swiftly as they should. And I would say from this morning, starting 3:30 this morning, the water's been rising, certainly in the east of Houston. We've been watching this, a lot of lower income minority neighborhoods that we're trying to respond quickly. And these are, the reason I bring it up is they're one-story ranch-style homes. And in some cases, people were told to move to the attic. Now that was later proven incorrect information. They should move to the roof line. But you have, as you mentioned, senior citizens, people that had knee surgery, young children, pets, not knowing whether to be if they're there to cut a hole into the roof. Now they're told they needed a chainsaw or some sort of axe so that they could have a hole to get to the roof so they could be rescued. And these rescues did not happen, mind you, for 4 and 5 and 6 hours. So water's rising, and in some cases, they still had electricity. And some people were calling in not knowing, do they turn it off? They're standing in 3 feet of water or a foot of water. Do they go and turn off the power? And how do they do that safely?
Right.
So there's just a lot of people didn't know quite how to respond to those extreme conditions.
Yeah, no, that is such an important concern. And I can tell you from covering other floods and natural disasters, in addition to the concerns about electricity and what happens with electricity meeting water and potential fire hazard, you also have, in some cases, gas mains and what happens in those cases when gas mains might be affected by rising floodwaters and could rupture potentially. And there are perils throughout. When we watch these images of people on boats being brought to safety, there is so much more to the story than we are able to show folks. And Leslie, one of those portions appears to be at this moment something that we haven't yet seen video of, an apparent tornado. There was a tornado warning, you said, where you are in Fort Bend County in the early hours Sunday morning, and by daylight you have seen what exactly throughout the community where you are?
Sure, and Sienna Plantation was one of the first areas that was reported to have, they didn't want to call it a tornado. People said they couldn't see the funnel clouds 1 in the morning. Sure. But the vast amount of devastation in a line was truly incredible. I have some of it on my Instagram and Facebook. But entire, fence lines are gone, trees were uprooted, windows exploded. But it was the barreling of wood through brick and the explosion into back bedrooms where in some cases people and children were sleeping. And how the wind just kind of uprooted and pulled doors out of windows. It's extraordinary. How no one was injured is really an incredible story. But immediately, people in the local community, particularly Sienna Plantation, started volunteering. They had Ridgepoint High School had a nonprofit group that came together. Some high school students had gloves and just started removing debris, fiberglass, glass. And it's just house after house has lost their roof. Massive holes, and everyone is trying to respond as quickly as possible during these small periods of time when there's no rain, like right now. So what you'll see right now in the neighborhoods is people checking their property, checking their neighbors, trying to replenish on their resources. They need more water. They needed a lot of tarp to cover these holes in the roof.
Yeah.
And you're seeing a lot of roofing trucks, and I know this from other hurricanes. You'll have contractors come in that'll just start driving from Ohio and different parts of the country to come and help remove these big trees, which are, in the middle of people's living rooms. Wow. So there's going to be damage here for a long time, and we're watching because there's 2 more days of extensive rain, and that's really going to put many of these bayous and watersheds that are 1 and 5 feet over capacity into more people's homes. I've taken pictures just down the street, and there's an entire neighborhood that's about 2 feet away from being completely flooded. And my brother, who's in the Memorial area of Houston, had to move his car, walk through waist-deep water to get back home onto his second floor, just to try to ride out the rest of this storm.
Wow, incredible. And Leslie, as you've been speaking, I've been looking at as well your Instagram feed here, and it is truly remarkable to see the force of those winds splitting one tree sort of right down the middle of its trunk there. It's just extraordinary to imagine what kind of force must have been involved. What did that sound like last night?
It's frightening.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard a lot of hurricanes, but I've not been through anything sounding like a tornado. It is a howling, high-pitched sound coming through the windows. It starts to shake, and it jumped over basically my home and landed a few miles away. Just a few miles away in the other part of the neighborhood, the back end of the neighborhood, and just kind of went down the golf course, quite honestly.
Wow.
And just kept hopscotch. If you look at the damage, it kind of hit one area, completely destroyed a side of a home, and then went, down. But trees, trampolines are in, wrought iron fences. A lot of metal is twisted. There's a lot of metal on the ground. And I had a little bit more. It's hard to even tell from some of these pictures. And the last set of pictures on my Instagram, which is just Leslie Sanchez, are from my brother. These are the ones in Memorial, just showing how quickly the water was rising. And again, people don't know whether to stay, and if they depart, there's not that many shelters that are as easily available. People have lost power, so they're watching things like CBSN. They're trying to get access at the Salvation Army or any type of a shelter so they know where they need to be.
Yeah, and Leslie, just as you've been speaking, we put up one of the images there from your Instagram feed that shows clearly there that car in the background submerged, or at least partially submerged in the rising waters. But examples now as well from your feed of the folks who have been trying to flee any way they can, what appears to be an air mattress or something that a person in the foreground here might be using to try and salvage whatever possessions they can. Folks in the background there attempting to wait